The Baltimore Ravens have a major decision to make with Mark Andrews and all of their tight ends. All of their tight ends are free agents after next season. We'll talk about all the options that the Ravens have, and I'll give my thoughts on how I see this thing playing out in this episode of the Flock Rundown.
Ravens Flock. The Flock Rundown is the place to be.
Motionless brainwaves attempt to swim their way to sense, can't tame the untamed.
Appreciate you, Ray. What's up, Ravens fans? My name is Ryan, and welcome back to another episode of the Flock Rundown. First of all, how we doing, man? I'm not doing great. I was thinking about hibernating for a couple months in depression. If I didn't run the channel, that's usually how I kind of operated. You know, I've been a diehard my whole life. I've only been running the channel for 2 years, but I've been a diehard my entire life. And whenever we would have a tough loss or the season didn't end the way that we wanted, I was just shook, man, for months. But I'm grateful for this community because now I feel like we can go through this together. You know what I mean? Like every Ravens fan watching this is feeling a very similar pain to what I'm feeling. And it's nice to be able to just kind of chop it up and go through it together, whether we're just complaining about, you know, what happened or what we can do better or are we ever going to get over the hump? And, you know, whatever those thoughts are, whatever those emotions are, it's just nice to go through it with other people, and it kind of absorbs that blow a little bit. So hopefully you guys are sticking around throughout the off season, man. If you're not and you want to take a break or you're barely watching any videos, I totally get that too. But if you are here, I appreciate you. I'm not going anywhere. We got a lot of things to talk about throughout this offseason, and I'm going to be as consistent as possible. But enough of all that. Let's get into today's topic, and that is what in the world are the Ravens going to do with Mark Andrews? We got a big decision, man. There's no doubt. There's a huge decision at stake here because every single tight end, Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely, Charlie Kolar, are all free agents after next season. So they all have 1 year left, and then they're all free agents. And Charlie Kolar and Likely have very small deals right now, so they're not going to be a factor into the Ravens' cap decisions next year. They'll definitely be on the team. Likely and Kolar will be here at least one more year, but there's decisions to be made after that. But Mark Andrews has a huge cap hit, $16.9 million next season. And we all know what just happened in the playoffs. We all know that that's a huge cap number. That is a huge cap number. And I'll just say right off the bat, I don't think the Ravens are paying $16.9 million. And he's due a $4 million roster bonus on March 16th. So if the Ravens are not trying to pay Andrews, they're going to have to do something over the next month and a half here and make a big decision that's going to impact the Ravens tight end room for years to come, most likely. So one option that the Ravens have is to do nothing this year with the tight end room. I think this is the least likely option, but I want to explore each option that the Ravens have. And the first option that we're talking about is they do nothing. They let Mark Andrews play out his last year. They let Likely play out his last year. They let Kolar play out his last year, and they pay Mark Andrews $16.9 million with a $4 million roster bonus, and they make the decision next offseason when they're all free agents. One benefit of this, I guess, is that you keep this tight end room intact, and I think this is one of the strongest tight end rooms in the NFL, if not the strongest. I mean, Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely are both tight end ones, especially Isaiah Likely. He's younger and he's on the rise. I feel like he's playing a lot more consistent right now. I really believe that the Ravens have two great tight ends. But the reason that I think this is the least likely option is just money, man. It's $16.9 million. It's the $4 million roster bonus. Is Mark Andrews worth $17 million next year? I do not think so. I love Mark Andrews. I love what he's done for this franchise. But he's not worth $17 million for next season when we got a lot of free agents. I know a lot of those free agents aren't the end of the world, and we'll make free agency videos too, but a guy like Ronnie Stanley, you'd have to completely let him go if you're paying Mark Andrews $17 million next year. So there's decisions that need to be made there, and I feel like a cap hit of $17 million for Mark Andrews is just not going to stick. So that's what it is right now. But there's going to be moves. There's going to be a change. I would say this is the least likely option, is to just stay pat and let this tight end room play out their last year on the contract and we pay Mark $17 million. I think there's like a 1% chance of that happening. The next option would be to trade Mark Andrews. Now, that would be great financially for the Ravens. They would clear his cap hit, and somebody else would absorb that blow and let him play out his 1 year or give him an extension or whatever that next team wants to do. I don't think the Ravens would get much in return just because Mark has a $17 million cap hit and he just went out pretty ugly in the playoffs. I doubt that helps his trade value. So I don't know what the Ravens would fetch in a trade for Mark Andrews, but probably a 5th round or later. I mean, it's not going to be good. It's not going to be good, but you clear him off the books, and now you have a lot more money. You probably can easily go bring Ronnie Stanley back if that's what you want to do, and Mark Andrews would be gone, though. So you would be thrusting Isaiah likely into that premier role, which I think he's more than capable of doing. And Charlie Kolar would then get a much larger role on this team. And we probably go draft another tight end too, somewhere in the mid rounds. I think this is a possible avenue if there's another team willing to trade for him, if the Ravens do want to get rid of him. I think this is more possible than doing nothing. So if the Ravens do want to move on from Mark Andrews and give a lot more responsibility to Likely and Kolar and whoever they draft, I think trading would be the best option because you'd get rid of that entire contract. You'd get a late round pick in return, and then you wouldn't have to absorb dead money, which would happen in this next scenario, and that's if the Ravens release him. I've seen a lot of fans begging and saying that he needs to be released. So if we do release Mark Andrews, we would save $11 million in cap room. But you get nothing in return and you have some dead money. So this is a worse scenario than trading him. So if the Ravens do want to move on from Mark Andrews, let's say that's Eric DeCosta's decision and he's like, this is it, man. Mark, you've done a lot for us, but we got to move on. I think they only cut him if they can't find a trade suitor, because why would you just release him and eat the dead money? I feel like you would try and trade him at least so that you could get a pick back. You know Eric DeCosta loves picks, man. And with the Ravens' tight salary cap in the future, we're going to need to nail some drafts. So you'd get a pick back and you'd clear Mark Andrews' contract completely. So I really feel like that would be, the trade would be the best option if you are moving on. The final option is a restructure / extension. And that is if the Ravens decide that they want to keep Mark Andrews here for long term, you know, Raven for life type thing. They're not going to pay that $17 million cap hit. There's no way. We are not paying Andrews that much next season. So what do? You got to extend him a couple years and spread that money out. Mark Andrews would have to potentially take a pay cut, which I think at this point in his career and based off his recent performance in the playoffs is not a ridiculous ask. I mean, $17 million a year, we can't extend him and have him making a yearly amount like that. You know, if Mark Andrews is about his money and is putting his foot down to be like, no, I need this or more, then they're moving on. But if Mark Andrews wants to stick around, wants to rebound and take a team-friendly deal and stay in Baltimore for the long term or for the rest of his career, I think the Ravens would welcome that. So then they would extend him, sign him to a 2-3 year extension, and he'd be here for the next 3 or 4 years, and you'd spread that money out. You basically restructure the deal so you eliminate the cap hit this year, and he ends up making, you know, having a $2, $3, $4, $5 million cap hit instead of $17 million. That $17 million is not happening. I can't say that enough. We are not paying Mark Andrews that much next year. But we could extend him and spread that money out. The Ravens love to do that. They've restructured deals in the past, and especially with guys that are staple Ravens like Mark Andrews. I know we got a sour taste in our mouth, but we can't deny that Mark Andrews is going to be in the Ring of Honor and is one of the greatest Ravens players to ever play for this franchise. He just passed Jamal Lewis this year to become the franchise all-time touchdown leader. Like, this is a Raven great, man, whether you want to look at it that way or not. So I would not be shocked if Mark Andrews wants to stay, doesn't want to go out like that. I don't want him to go out like that, to be honest with you. Do you want the last play of Mark Andrews in a Ravens uniform to be that dropped 2-point conversion? The fumble a couple drives before that? I mean, that's sickening, man. That's a sick way to go out. Anytime anyone brings up the name Mark Andrews, we're thinking about that play. I don't want to remember Mark Andrews like that. Mark Andrews has done so much for this organization. Even this season, so many people are saying he fell off and whatnot. He had the most touchdowns ever in a single season this year. He had 11 touchdowns. That's the most he's ever had in a season of his career. So it's not like Mark Andrews is some scrub, man. I think this is a elite competitor, and I would not be surprised if the Ravens want to keep him around. I do think the roles switch a little bit, though. I think moving forward, Isaiah Likely is going to get a lot more targets per game, and I think that Mark Andrews is kind of his sidekick, and not the other way around. I really believe that. I think Mark Andrews still has, if he stays, still has a lot of big moments left in his Ravens career. But I think Isaiah Likely does as well, and he's really coming on. So to sum it all up, I think the Ravens would like to keep Mark Andrews in a Ravens uniform, but it is going to come down to money. Is Mark Andrews willing to take a pay cut for the next few years? If he's not, I think the Ravens move on. I think we got plenty with Isaiah Likely and Charlie Kolar, and we're going to draft more guys that are going to be plugged into this tight end pipeline. We develop tight ends very well, and they're cheap. Isaiah Likely might end up getting a bigger extension next season, but right now, Charlie Kolar and Isaiah Likely aren't causing us a lot of cap trouble. Mark Andrews is next year. So there's going to be a move, and I don't know if Mark Andrews is going to want to take a pay cut or not. If he is willing to take a pay cut, we can extend him. He'd have to make a lot less, but he'd be here for the rest of his career most likely. That does then kind of put a wedge in between Isaiah Likely's future or not, because I don't see us then paying Isaiah Likely $12+ million a year and Mark Andrews $10 million or whatever they agree on. I don't think that we're going to be paying both of them. So I would say the most likely option, to be honest with you, is the Ravens do move on. I don't know if that is a trade or a release. It depends if there's a trade suitor. I think that the most likely option is that the Ravens trade or release him, unfortunately. I'd like him to stick around. I just don't know if he's going to take that big of a pay cut, and I think the Ravens like what they have with Isaiah Likely. I'd be shocked if they just let Isaiah Likely go and keep Mark Andrews for years and years and years. That seems like an unlikely move, to be honest with you, no pun intended. I think Isaiah Likely's got way more upside right now, or at least what's left in his career. I don't know if he'll accomplish what Mark Andrews has accomplished, but I think just, the remaining years of their NFL career, Isaiah Likely has more production ahead. And I think the Ravens would like to keep him around. I mean, every time the ball goes to Isaiah Likely, he ends up making a play. So I think the Ravens would like to keep Mark and Likely. I think Mark probably wants to stay and not go out like that, but I don't think the numbers are going to work out. I think that's going to be the issue. And if the numbers don't work out, we got to move on from Mark Andrews. We got to keep Likely here for the next few years. If we pay Mark Andrews $17 million, we're letting guys like Ronnie Stanley walk. And then we got to go draft a rookie tackle and go with a younger offensive line again. And I'm not saying that won't happen. We'll talk about the free agency in more depth in future videos here, but I don't like that idea of having to go with an even younger, less experienced offensive line. I think bringing Ronnie Stanley back for a couple years really, really keeps this line on the rise and stabilizes it quite a bit. And we could go focus on getting some guards. And the tackle situation would be fine if we had Ronnie Stanley and Roger Rosengarten. If we lose Ronnie Stanley and keep a guy like Mark Andrews, I just don't think that is best for this team. I think there's bigger issues on the offensive line than there would be in the tight end room. So we will see some moves. We also have the end of the year press conference coming tomorrow. So we'll hear from Eric DeCosta and John Harbaugh. I'm sure they're going to be asked some tough questions. But let me know what you guys think. I appreciate you guys, as always, for tuning in to another episode of the Flock Rundown. Have a beautiful rest of your day. And I'll let the greatest linebacker in the history of the game take us out.
Ravens Flock. Flock Rundown is the place to be. My man Ryan has been a lifelong Ravens fan since he was born. The Flock Rundown. Nothing gets better than waking up and wondering how high we can fly. Tune in.
Motionless brainwaves attempt to swim their way to sense, can't tame the untamed.